You know, usually when we talk about some massive technological breakthrough, there's this, I don't know, this underlying expectation of a really smooth transition. Like think about upgrading your home internet.
Right, yeah, you just get the new router.
Exactly. You unplug the old router, you plug in a new one, and suddenly, everything is just faster, it's clean, it's manageable.
It feels linear because, I mean, we're biologically wired to expect linear progress. We like things step by step.
Right. And it's so comforting to think of history that way. But when you step back and look at what's actually happening right now with artificial intelligence, that whole router analogy just completely falls apart. We aren't looking at a simple software upgrade anymore. We're looking at two massive continent-sized tectonic plates slamming into each other at 1,000 miles an hour.
It really is a profound structural shock, like a complete reordering of how value is created, how it's distributed, and frankly, who controls it.
Which is exactly why we're here. Welcome to today's deep dive. We are going to put you, the listener, right at the epicenter of that collision. Because our mission today is to unpack what might be the absolute defining paradox of our age.
The big one.
It is. We're staring down a technology that promises infinite, unimaginable abundance-like, literally the end of scarcity as a concept. But at the exact same moment, it is threatening to create a level of social and economic inequality that we really haven't seen since the Gilded Age.
And the roadmap we are using to navigate this today comes from Paramendra Bhagat's really comprehensive analysis. It's titled The AI Abundance Paradox. Elon Musk's vision of plenty meets Bernie Sanders' call for a data center moratorium. And it is just an incredibly detailed look at the mechanics of where we are right now.
Yeah, and more importantly, how we actually survive it. Because the tension in this text is palpable. On one side of the ring, you have Elon Musk painting this post-scarcity utopia, completely powered by cheap, infinite intelligence and humanoid robotics.
And then on the exact opposite side, you have the stark reality of Washington, D.C., where Senator Bernie Sanders and Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez introduced the Artificial Intelligence Data Center Moratorium Act, which was, what, just a few weeks ago?
Yeah, March 25, 2026. So just very recently. And it's two radically different visions. One side is basically demanding unchecked, foot-on-the-gas acceleration, and the other side is desperately trying to pull the emergency brake.
Now, I think we need to set a ground rule here before we get too deep into this.
Oh, absolutely. I want to be crystal clear with you, the listener, right from the start. We're going to explore some highly contrasting, very politically charged economic viewpoints today. But we're looking at this entirely objectively.
Right, we aren't picking sides.
Exactly. Our goal is to dissect the ideas and the actual arguments contained in the source material. We're not here to endorse the specific worldview of Elon Musk or Bernie Sanders or AOC or the left or the right. We're just here to understand the architecture of what they're arguing.
Because you really have to separate the mechanics from the politics if you're ever going to understand the actual trajectory of the economy. The math doesn't really care about the politics.
That's a great way to put it. So the ultimate question we are teasing out today is this. What happens when the irresistible force of AI-driven productivity meets the immovable object of 20th century economic policy? Let's start with the acceleration side of the equation. Musk's post-scarcity vision.
Okay, yeah. Let's dive into the utopia.
Because when we say a post-scarcity economy, that just sounds like pure science fiction, right? What is the actual economic theory underpinning that kind of optimism?
To understand the optimism, you have to look closely at the concept of marginal cost. Historically, human economics has been totally defined by scarcity. Like, if you want to produce one more car or write one more piece of software or even diagnose one more patient, it requires a human being.
Right. And human beings are expensive.
Exactly. Human intelligence and human physical labor are inherently expensive. Humans need sleep, they need health care, they logically demand higher wages over time, and crucially, they only scale linearly.
So if I run a factory and I want to double my output, I roughly have to double my workforce. There's no magical shortcut.
Right. But the core argument of acceleration is that AI and robotics are fundamentally breaking that linear scale. AI dramatically reduces the marginal cost of intelligence to essentially zero, and robotics reduces the marginal cost of physical labor to near zero.
And when you look at the ecosystem Musk is building, it's not just, a collection of random tech companies. It's a vertically integrated system designed specifically to exploit the zero marginal cost.
Yes, the puzzle pieces are very intentional.
You have XAI, which is designed to entirely automate cognitive labor, the thinking part. And then you have Tesla Optimus, the humanoid robots designed to automate the physical labor, the doing part.
And then you add SpaceX to that equation, right? They provide the infrastructure for orbital computing and global-scale, low-latency connectivity. So when you combine infinite cognitive labor with infinite physical labor, and you power it globally, the cost of production essentially collapses.
It's staggering to think about. Fagat's research points out that Musk is heavily inspired by Ian M. Banks' Culture series, which, if you haven't read those books, they depict this universe where super-intelligent machines manage production so perfectly and so efficiently that currency itself is it's a ceremonial concept.
It's post-money. Nobody works to survive in that universe. You work because you want to make art or because you're curious.
But let's ground that in hard economic terms for a second. Think about what sustainable abundance actually means. If an AI can generate world-class software instantly, and a robot can manufacture physical goods tirelessly, 24 hours a day, without ever drawing a paycheck.
Then why would a consumer pay a premium for software? Why pay the massive markup for a manufactured good?
Because the supply is essentially infinite. It sounds like Musk views the global economy as this outdated, clunky smartphone operating system from like 2010. And AI is the ultimate software patch that just deletes the bug called scarcity. You download the update and suddenly there's enough for everyone.
That is the theoretical destination, yes. Production basically becomes a fire that never runs out of fuel.
Okay, but I have to push back here. Because if the destination is this incredible post-labor utopia, what does the road trip look like?
Ah, the messy part.
Right, because history tells us that massive economic transitions are incredibly bloody. Does everyone actually get a seat in the car on this road trip, or are we throwing half the population under the tires just to get there?
That is the multi-trillion-dollar question right there. And it's exactly why this tech optimism is meeting such fierce, visceral resistance. The problem isn't necessarily the destination. The problem is the violent turbulence of the transition.
Which brings us to the reality check. Because the road we are on right now is what economists call a K-shaped economy. Let's really break this down for the listener because it's vital to understanding why people are so angry right now.
Yeah, a K-shaped economy is a visual metaphor. Imagine the trajectory of the country's wealth looking like the letter K. The upper arm of the K rises sharply upward.
Who is on that upper arm?
That represents the asset owners, the tech elite, the executives, and basically anyone holding significant shares in the companies driving this AI revolution. Their wealth is compounding at rates we haven't seen in modern history.
And then there's the lower arm of the K, which slopes downward. That's the working class and increasingly the middle class. They're sinking into job insecurity, stagnant wages, and just getting crushed by inflation and the rising cost of living. It's not just inequality, it's a total divergence of reality.
Fagat uses a very sharp analogy here. Imagine the economy as two trains leaving the exact same station at the exact same time, but heading in completely opposite directions at full speed.
Wow. And we are seeing this upward trajectory most clearly in the magnificent seven tech giants. You know, the Apples, the Microsofts, the NVIDIAs. But here is the critical insight from the text. This AI abundance is being pre-sold. What does that mean in practice?
It means the stock market is essentially a forward-looking mechanism. The current soaring valuations of these tech giants are based on the promise of future AI productivity. The market is pricing in the utopia today.
So the shareholders and executives are getting incredibly rich right now, long before everyday households feel a single drop of that benefit in their actual day-to-day lives.
Exactly. The wealth is pulled into the present, while the abundance is pushed into the future.
And meanwhile, the reality on the ground for the average worker is getting grim, especially for a demographic that usually feels incredibly insulated from automation. We're talking about the white-collar ladder.
This is a massive historical departure. Whenever we talked about automation in the 20th century, we pictured factory floors, we pictured assembly lines, maybe trucking or retail checkout clerks. It was always blue-collar physical labor.
But this time, the first wave of destruction is hitting the knowledge economy.
Hard and fast.
Think about you or your friends. We're talking about entry-level programming, customer support, clerical and administrative work, paralegals, junior analysts in finance and consulting, marketing, copywriting, routine journalism. These are the jobs on the chopping block right now.
The irony is so profound. AI is eating the jobs of the very people who built the modern digital world. The people who sat in cubicles, writing code, and designing digital systems are the first ones being replaced by the systems they helped create.
Let's make this real for a second. Imagine you're a 24-year-old junior paralegal. You went to a good school, you have, let's say, $80,000 in student debt, and your primary job right now is reading hundreds of pages of case law and writing summaries for the senior partners.
Well, a large language model can do that in 3 seconds.
Right, in 3 seconds, for 2 cents, and it doesn't miss a comma. The panic for that 24-year-old isn't theoretical. It's an immediate existential crisis.
And that leads to a much deeper structural problem that the article outlines, the concept of the broken escalator.
Right, because it's not just about that one paralegal losing a job.
Right.
It's about how an entire generation learns a profession.
Traditionally, you enter a white-collar profession through a junior role. You do the routine, often tedious, foundational work. And in exchange for doing that grunt work, you learn the craft. You absorb knowledge from the seniors. You get mentored.
You step onto the escalator.
Exactly. You step on, and over 10 years, you move up to a senior position. But AI is phenomenally good at exactly those junior-level tasks.
So what happens? Law firms, tech companies, accounting firms, they just stop hiring juniors. Because why would you hire 10 junior developers when you can just have 2 senior developers using AI to generate the exact same amount of code?
But if you stop hiring juniors today, how does anyone ever get the experience to become a senior professional tomorrow?
You completely sever the apprenticeship pipeline. The escalator is fundamentally broken. You have a bunch of senior executives comfortably on the top floor, a mass of displaced young people stuck on the ground floor, and the stairs have been completely removed.
And when that escalator breaks, the fundamental American promise of upward mobility just becomes a ghost story. People realize the game is rigged, or at least that the rules have changed so drastically that they can no longer win.
Which perfectly explains the panic in Washington. I mean, if the escalator is breaking, it makes total sense why politicians like Bernie Sanders are desperately reaching for the emergency brake. This isn't just about protecting a few jobs, it's about preventing a massive social rupture.
Which brings us directly to the Artificial Intelligence Data Center Moratorium Act.
Right. Let's dig into the mechanics of this bill. Why a moratorium and why target data centers specifically? If you're worried about algorithms taking white-collar jobs, why go after the physical buildings?
Because you can't easily regulate math.
That's true.
You can't put a padlock on an algorithm once it's out there. But you can regulate the physical footprint required to run that math. And modern AI requires massive physical infrastructure. These frontier models are trained and run in hyperscale data centers that are consuming just mind-boggling amounts of resources.
Pagat's research highlights that these centers are consuming the equivalent of small cities' worth of electricity. And it's not just power. They use millions of gallons of water just to cool the server racks so they don't literally melt down.
It's putting an immense strain on local electrical grids. In some areas, it's actually driving up utility rates for the normal people living nearby.
Sanders frames this in a very visceral way in the text. He views these data centers as the new industrial-era smokestacks.
The smokestacks of the 21st century, it's a powerful image.
It is, because it invokes this classic extraction model, right? The tech oligarchs build these massive digital factories in a local community. The wealth and the profits generated by the AI are extracted and sent straight to Silicon Valley or Wall Street, while the physical costs, the strained power grid, the environmental impact, the higher electricity bills are pushed onto the local working-class residents.
And I think a lot of people feel that moral outrage.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I understand the moral outrage there completely. But let me play devil's advocate for a minute. If I'm a free market advocate looking at this moratorium, I'm screaming that this is massive government overreach. If you pause the construction of data centers, aren't you just killing the engine of the modern economy? Pagat calls this the danger of unilateral disarmament.
And that is absolutely the strongest critique of the moratorium approach. AI is no longer just a commercial software product. It is a strategic national asset. Think of it like nuclear power in the 1940s or the space race in the 1960s. The geopolitical implications are absolute.
Because if the United States unilaterally decides to block AI infrastructure to protect local power grids, the innovation doesn't just politely stop worldwide.
No. The capital, the researchers, and the computational power simply flow across the border to somewhere else. Specifically to geopolitical rivals like China, who are pouring hundreds of billions of dollars into achieving AI dominance.
So if you freeze the future to save the present, you might end up losing both. Because if an authoritarian state achieves artificial general intelligence first, they dictate the rules of the 21st century.
Exactly. This puts us squarely in what historians call the Valley of Instability. This is the highly dangerous window of time where technological automation dramatically outpaces the ability of our political and social institutions to adapt.
And when institutions fail to adapt and people feel the economic ground crumbling beneath them, they don't just sit quietly and accept it. they get angry. The research notes that this valley of instability is incredibly fertile ground for populism, political extremism, and severe social fracture.
There is a brilliant analogy used in the text to describe this dilemma. A moratorium is essentially a fire alarm. But the AI revolution is not a house fire. You can't just put it out. It is a climate shift.
I love that. You can't just pause the weather. You have to actually build better architecture to withstand it.
Precisely. So if a full stop a moratorium is the wrong tool because it forfeits global leadership, and reckless acceleration is the wrong tool because it destroys the middle class and breaks the escalator, what is the synthesis?
The synthesis is smart acceleration. And this is where we really, really need to dig in, because Bhagat outlines 10 specific mechanical policy innovations required to build this new architecture. We're going to spend some real time exploring how these actually work, not just what they're called.
Let's start with the first major hurdle, redesigning the safety net. If the K-shaped economy is funneling all the wealth to the top, how do we restructure the flow of capital?
The first proposal here is the national dividend model. Walk me through this, because, on the surface, handing out dividends based on tech productivity just sounds like a recipe for hyperinflation.
Right. But the underlying philosophy here is public ownership of the productivity commons. Think about how these massive AI models were actually built. They weren't created in a vacuum by a few smart engineers.
No, they were trained on the collective output of human history. The entire internet, every book, every piece of art, decades of Reddit forums.
Exactly. The public generated the data that makes the AI valuable in the first place. Therefore, the argument is that the public deserves a royalty.
It's the Alaska Permanent Fund model, but for data.
Right. In Alaska, the state recognizes that the oil in the ground belongs to the citizens, not just the extraction companies that drill for it. So they tax the oil revenue and distribute a yearly dividend check to every single resident. The argument here is that AI is the new oil. You implement a modest tax on extreme AI windfalls or a licensing fee on the hyperscale models, and you pool that into a sovereign wealth fund.
And as AI productivity drives the cost of goods down and corporate profits way up, that dividend grows. But wait, let me stop you there. What stops this from just causing massive inflation? If you just give everyone an extra $1,000 a month, doesn't rent just go up by $1,000 the next day?
That is the primary economic friction with any basic income model, and it's a very fair concern. The counterargument provided by proponents of the dividend is that AI is fundamentally deflationary.
Because it makes everything cheaper.
Exactly. Because AI makes everything from legal services to manufacturing to logistics drastically cheaper to produce, the baseline cost of living should theoretically plummet at the same time the dividend is being distributed. It's essentially a race between the deflationary power of the tech and the inflationary pressure of the cash.
It's fascinating. It changes the citizen from a mere consumer into an equity shareholder in the economy. Now, let's look at the second policy, which is aimed directly at our 24-year-old paralegal we talked about earlier, wage insurance. How does this differ from standard unemployment?
Standard unemployment insurance was designed for the 20th century factory model. It assumes a temporary blip. You get laid off from the auto plant, you collect a check for 6 months, and then you get hired by another auto plant doing the exact same job for roughly the same pay.
But in the AI era, that job might be permanently vaporized. It doesn't exist at the new plant either.
Exactly. So let's use your paralegal example. They were making $80,000. Their job is automated. The best job they can find in a totally new pivot career only pays $50,000.
Ouch.
Right. That $30,000 drop isn't a blip. It's a permanent structural downgrade that will likely cause them to default on their mortgage.
So how does wage insurance intervene there?
Instead of just paying them to sit at home and search for a ghost job that doesn't exist, the government steps in to bridge the gap after they take the new, lower-paying job. So the insurance might cover, say, 50% of the lost wages for a period of 2 or 3 years.
Okay. So in this case, the government supplements their $50,000 salary with an extra $15,000 a year while they upskill and adapt in their new industry.
Right. It heavily incentivizes getting back into the workforce immediately, rather than waiting for unemployment to run out. It keeps them attached to the labor market, and it turns a brutal financial cliff into a manageable slope.
It prevents the downward spiral of foreclosure and bankruptcy that permanently scars families and really entire communities. Okay, rounding out the safety net category is portable benefits accounts. This seems absolutely essential given how fragmented work is becoming.
The American social contract has historically tied your healthcare, your retirement, and your general stability to a single full-time employer. But AI is rapidly accelerating the shift toward a hyper-fluid gig-style economy. People are stringing together freelance contracts, consulting gigs, part-time remote work.
And if your benefits are tied to an employer, the gig economy is really just disguised poverty. You have zero safety net.
Portable benefits decouple your security from a specific boss. You have an account that travels with you. If you drive an Uber on Monday, do freelance graphic design on Tuesday, and consult on Thursday, every single one of those platforms, plus the government, pays a prorated amount into your central portable account.
So you maintain your healthcare and your 401k regardless of how your income is stitched together month to month. That makes total sense. All right, let's shift gears to the second category of policies: labor, skills, and corporate accountability. If the escalator is broken, how do we actually build a new one? The first proposal here is human capital contracts. I love the premise of this because it feels like a direct attack on the higher education grift.
For decades, the government has poured billions into retraining programs for displaced workers. Think of the generic learn to code campaigns from the 2010s, and overwhelmingly, they have a terrible success rate.
Why is that?
Because the training provider gets paid up front. Once you enroll, the community college or the coding bootcamp gets their money, regardless of whether you actually get a job at the end of it.
There is zero skin in the game. And now, learn to code is terrible advice anyway, because AI writes much better code than a junior developer.
A human capital contract forces brutal honesty into the system. Under this model, the training provider is only paid by the government based on actual, verifiable job placement outcomes.
Oh, wow. So if you train 50 displaced factory workers in cybersecurity and they don't get hired,
You do not get paid. The bootcamp eats the cost.
that completely flips the incentive structure. It forces the training programs to abandon all that theoretical fluff and work directly with local employers to find out exactly what skills are actually missing and then train specifically for those roles.
It perfectly aligns the financial incentive of the educator with the actual economic survival of the student.
Which flows perfectly into the next policy: universal apprenticeship. This seems crucial if we're finally moving away from the default four-year college path.
College is becoming prohibitively expensive, and frankly, a bachelor's degree in a generalized field is rapidly losing its premium in an AI-driven market. We need a massive expansion of apprenticeships, but we have to expand our imagination way beyond just plumbers and electricians.
So what does a 21st century apprenticeship actually look like?
It looks like a structured paid pathway into the AI economy. Data labeling. Managing and maintaining fleets of autonomous robots in warehouses. Green energy grid installation. Prompt engineering for specialized models.
Creating a viable, respected career ladder for the millions of people who don't have and, frankly, don't need a computer science degree. Okay, but how do we hold the massive corporations accountable for their role in all this? Because if a company automates 10,000 jobs, their stock price skyrockets. The executives get massive bonuses, but society is left holding the bag for the unemployment and the social services.
That is a classic economic externality. The company privatizes the profit and socializes the cost. Bhagat's research proposes two mechanisms to fix this: AI impact bonds and a workforce equity mandate.
Let's break down the impact bonds first. How do you even quantify the damage of automation?
If a company's workforce reduction due to automation crosses a certain threshold, say, eliminating more than 10% of their staff within a year, they are required to pay into an AI impact bond. This fund is directly earmarked to pay for the wage insurance and human capital contracts we just discussed. It forces the company to internalize the actual cost of displacement.
I can hear the corporate lobbyists screaming already, "You're punishing efficiency. You're taxing progress."
And that is a valid macroeconomic concern. If you tax automation too heavily, companies might just offshore their headquarters to a country that doesn't. But the counter-argument is that without a transition fund, the resulting social unrest will be far, far more expensive for those corporations than the tax ever would be.
That makes sense. And what about the workforce equity mandate?
This involves aggressively expanding employee stock ownership plans, or ESOPs. The logic is simple. If capital, in the form of AI and robots, is going to permanently replace human labor as the primary driver of productivity, then the remaining human workforce must be given equity in the company.
So you aren't just an employee getting a flat salary that gets eaten by inflation. You are a stakeholder, sharing in the exponential gains of the machine you help manage. It attempts to bend that K-shaped curve back toward the middle. Okay, moving on to category 3, infrastructure and geography. We're getting into the physical reality of AI here, the Grid Acceleration Act and Opportunity Zones 2.0.
We talked earlier about the massive power requirements of data centers. In the AI era, electricity is literally the new economic oxygen.
Right, a gigawatt is the new gold standard.
If a city or a region doesn't have access to abundant, cheap, reliable power, it cannot host AI infrastructure. And if it can't host the infrastructure, it will be entirely left out of the economic boom. Unequal power distribution literally guarantees unequal economic growth.
So the Grid Acceleration Act is about fast-tracking the boring stuff, permitting for high-voltage transmission lines, maybe deregulation for next-generation nuclear microreactors.
It's about cutting the red tape that currently takes 10 years to build a single power line in the U.S. You can't win an AI race if you can't plug the machines in. And Opportunity Zones 2.0 ties directly into this infrastructure play.
How so? Because the original Opportunity Zones were supposed to help poor areas, but they often ended up just acting as tax shelters for real estate developers building, like, luxury condos.
Exactly. Version 2.0 would require actual job density. Tax incentives are only granted if the investment creates sustained, high-paying jobs in advanced manufacturing, AI logistics, or infrastructure in regions that have been hollowed out.
So moving away from passive real estate speculation and toward actual industrial revival. Finally, let's look at Category 4, democratic access. The public option for AI, or what the text calls the civic intelligence layer.
This tackles the monopoly problem directly. Right now, training a frontier AI model costs billions of dollars. That means only 3 or 4 massive tech companies on the entire planet can afford to do it.
And if 4 unelected CEOs control the underlying intelligence layer of the entire economy, they effectively own the operating system of society.
They control the biases, the censorship, the educational foundation, and the pricing structure for everyone else. The proposal here is to create a government-funded, open-source AI ecosystem. Think of it like the interstate highway system or a digital public library.
A robust, highly capable model that is offered free or at a very low cost to small businesses, independent researchers, and public schools. It ensures that AI acts as a public utility of empowerment, preventing a total corporate monopoly.
It democratizes access to the basic building blocks of the future. You don't want a future where only big tech can afford intelligence.
Now, I want to step back from the policy weeds for a second and bring up something profoundly human that the author notes. Bagat writes that a society can survive poverty, and it can even survive deep inequality, but it cannot survive humiliation.
That's a powerful word.
It is that feeling that the future is happening entirely without you, that your skills are useless and your life is irrelevant. Are these 10 policies actually enough to give people their dignity back?
That is the absolute emotional core of this entire debate. When a human being feels humiliated and discarded by their own society, they radicalize. That is the historical default. Implementing these policies requires an immense amount of political courage because they disrupt deeply entrenched interests.
But history shows us we are capable of it, right? We are paralyzed.
Not at all. Look at the 20th century. The United States built the interstate highway system, we executed the Apollo program, we designed Social Security from scratch, we built the foundational architecture of the internet, we have the capacity for massive civilization-altering ambition. The question isn't capability, it is purely whether we have the political will to execute it before the social fabric tears.
But here is where the research takes a very dark, very necessary turn. Because economic policy is really only half the battle. AI isn't just a tool for producing wealth. It's a tool for processing information. And that means it fundamentally alters the balance of power between the citizen and the state. Which brings us to Section 5, the dark mirror AI and the automated surveillance state.
This is where we have to validate the very real, very rational fears that people have about this technology. When you apply AI to surveillance, the cost of monitoring a population drops to near zero.
I want the listener to really visualize this. Think about the smartphone sitting on your desk right now. Historically, if the state wanted to monitor you, say, the FBI tapping your phone in the 1980s, it was extremely expensive. They needed a judge to sign a warrant, an agent to physically sit in a van with headphones, a transcriber to type out the conversation, and an analyst to figure out what it meant. Authoritarianism had a massive overhead cost.
Look at the Stasi in East Germany. They had to employ hundreds of thousands of informants and agents just to read people's mail and listen to phone calls. It was clumsy. And because it relied on human labor, it was naturally limited in scale. You simply couldn't watch everyone at once.
But AI replaces the agent in the van with an algorithm. Software is cheap. Software scales infinitely. And software never, ever sleeps.
And we aren't talking about a hypothetical future here. This is current capability, real-time facial recognition, tracking your movements through a city using public cameras, predictive policing algorithms deciding who is likely to commit a crime before it even happens.
Automated censorship across social media platforms, identifying and deleting dissenting opinions in milliseconds.
And micro-targeted propaganda. Algorithms that don't just know your broad political leanings, but know your specific psychological vulnerabilities, and feed you customized narratives designed to enrage you or make you completely apathetic.
In the wrong hands, AI doesn't just passively monitor a society, it automates the enforcement of power. It creates this digital panopticon where dissent becomes mathematically impossible to organize.
It turns democracy into a stage play. You might still have voting booths, but if the entire information ecosystem is completely controlled and curated by state algorithms, the outcome is entirely predetermined.
AI is a knife. It can cut bread or it can cut throats. And the fear is that the state is currently holding a very, very sharp knife.
And given the natural tendency of vast bureaucracies to hoard power, that fear is entirely justified.
But what happens if we take that same knife and we put it in the hands of the citizens? This brings us to what I think is the most brilliant, paradigm-shifting concept in the entire text: the glass house, reverse surveillance, and the civic intelligence layer.
This counter-narrative is almost completely absent from mainstream debates. We are so conditioned to assume the state will use technology to watch the citizens. We rarely pause to discuss how citizens can use AI to watch the state.
Bagat points out something obvious but profound. Government bureaucracy acts as camouflage. Governments produce oceans of data every single day. Procurement records, local budgets, zoning board minutes, thousands of pages of legislative bills. Technically, in a democracy, all of this is public record.
But practically, it is completely useless to the average citizen. It is buried in complex legalese and spread across a dozen clunky government websites. The state's greatest shield from accountability has always been complexity. You can hide a massive amount of corruption, cronyism, and waste inside a 1,000-page PDF.
Because no human being has the time or the sanity to sit down and read it. But AI burns right through that camouflage. The AI doesn't get tired. It can process that 1,000-page PDF in 2 seconds.
Imagine using AI for automated civic auditing, an open-source tool that tracks every single local tax dollar in real time, cross-referencing city council contracts with the campaign donations of the companies winning those contracts, and instantly flagging anomalies for local journalists.
Let's look at the legislative level. Imagine an AI acting as a bill reader for democracy. A 1,000-page omnibus spending bill drops in Congress at midnight, and they are voting on it at 8:00 a.m. In the past, lobbyists shoved their pet projects into page 800 knowing no senator would ever read it.
But with a civic intelligence layer, that bill is ingested instantly, and it isn't just summarized, it is personalized.
Exactly. You wake up, you look at your phone, and you ask your AI assistant, how does this new bill impact my specific small business? Or, which fossil fuel companies are getting hidden subsidies in Section 4? The AI translates the bureaucratic camouflage into plain English.
It changes the entire power dynamic. Right now, navigating democracy is like trying to drive through a sprawling, chaotic city with no map and all the street signs written in a language you don't speak. AI becomes the map. It turns the impenetrable black box of government into a glass house.
Think about how this permanently alters elections. Modern political campaigns are essentially just partisan marketing wars. They run on 30-second attack ads, outrage, and wildly simplified slogans. But Bagat argues that AI could replace that marketing with actual voter education.
Picture a neutral, locally run AI assistant active on your phone during a presidential debate. A candidate makes a claim about their economic record. The AI fact-checks it against macroeconomic data in real time. It compares their promises tonight with their actual voting record over the last 10 years. It calculates the actual projected impact of their tax plan on your specific income bracket.
It strips away the mysticism and the emotional manipulation of politics. It forces politicians to argue on the merits of reality. But beyond just holding the government accountable, the research suggests AI can radically redesign how we interact with the state on a daily practical level. Let's look at the final section: reinventing governance, from bureaucracy to empowerment.
The primary concept introduced here is voice-first democracy.
This is huge because it gets at how hostile government feels to ordinary people. Think about the sheer friction of interacting with the state. navigating confusing portals, remembering passwords, filling out 20-page paper forms, waiting in line at the DMV for 3 hours.
The government currently functions like a highly inefficient corporation from 1985, and we have to recognize that bureaucratic complexity is fundamentally unequal.
Us.
If you are wealthy, you hire an accountant to navigate the tax code or a lawyer to navigate zoning laws. But if you are elderly, or if you struggle with digital literacy, or if English isn't your first language, successfully navigating the government to get your basic benefits is an absolute nightmare. The friction is a barrier to entry.
But a voice-first interface bypasses all of that. You don't need bureaucratic literacy. You just need to be able to speak. The research envisions a world where a citizen can just talk to their phone, apply for my state unemployment benefits, or renew my driver's license, or help me schedule a doctor's appointment through Medicaid.
The AI translates your natural language into the complex API calls required by the state's backend systems. It takes the power of a highly paid personal executive assistant and democratizes it, giving it to every single citizen for free. It turns governance from a punitive chore into a seamless convenience.
And when the government is actually convenient and actually helps you, that rebuilds trust in the institution. Now, I want to tackle what might be the most radical and definitely the most controversial idea in this entire text. It attempts to solve the massive hyper-politicized immigration debate in the Americas. The author proposes implementing an Aadhaar and UPI-style system. Explain what that means and how on earth it applies to the border crisis.
To understand this, we have to look at India. Aadhaar is India's biometric digital identity system. UPI is their instant cashless digital payment rail. Before these systems, hundreds of millions of Indians were unbanked. They existed entirely in the informal cash economy, which meant they couldn't get credit, and the government couldn't easily distribute aid to them without massive corruption.
But by combining a secure digital ID with an instant digital payment system, they brought hundreds of millions of people into the formal, trackable economy almost overnight.
Exactly, and Bhagat suggests applying a similar architecture to the Americas to resolve the immigration crisis.
But wait, the pushback here is massive. A lot of Americans hear biometric digital ID and instantly think of the mark of the beast or the ultimate deep state surveillance tool.
And privacy safeguards would have to be airtight, utilizing zero-knowledge proofs where the system can verify that you are legally allowed to work without exposing your entire personal history. But look at the core argument. The border crisis is fundamentally a paperwork and identity crisis.
Because millions of undocumented people are working in a shadow economy. They're easily exploited by employers, they are untaxed, and they are untraceable.
If you build a secure, pan-American digital identity system linked to a cashless payment rail, you can replace the chaos of the border with a highly scalable, perfectly trackable legal guest worker program.
It attempts to take this massive, fiery moral debate and turn it into a calm administrative process. If employers are mandated to use this system for payroll, the shadow economy disappears. You get instant verification of employment, perfect payroll transparency, automated tax compliance. The text puts it very bluntly, no more undocumented human beings.
Not through the brutality of mass deportations, but by making legal integration so easy and operating outside the system so impossible that the black market for labor simply evaporates. It brings everyone into the light.
It's a massive swing. But it shows how applying AI to bureaucratic bottlenecks can solve problems that politicians have been arguing about for 40 years. And to close out this deep dive, we have to look at the ultimate empowerment tools: universal AI tutors and AI health companions.
This loops us right back to the beginning of our conversation about the K-shaped economy. What is the root cause of systemic inequality? It is unequal human capital formation.
If a child grows up in a poor zip code, they usually go to an underfunded school with overcrowded classrooms.
Yeah.
If they fall behind in math, they stay behind. Meanwhile, a wealthy child gets a private tutor.
A universal AI tutor fundamentally shatters that dynamic. We are talking about making world-class, personalized education a fundamental human right, totally decoupled from geography or local property taxes. An AI that adapts instantly to a child's specific learning pace, translates into any language, and has literally infinite patience.
And the AI health companion does the same thing for medicine. Right now, our healthcare system is incredibly expensive because it is reactive. We wait until a patient has a massive heart attack, and then we spend $100,000 treating them in the ER.
An AI health companion, linked to wearable biometric sensors, shifts the paradigm from expensive, reactive treatment to incredibly cheap, continuous, preventive monitoring. It spots the arrhythmia 6 months before the heart attack.
These aren't just neat consumer gadgets. They are structural attacks on the root causes of poverty. Universal tutoring and preventive health AI raise the baseline of human capability. Voice-first government removes the friction of bureaucracy. You are fundamentally raising the floor for every human being in the society.
It creates a foundation where the abundance generated by AI can actually be absorbed and utilized by the masses rather than just hoarded by the elites.
Okay, we have covered an immense, staggering amount of ground today. Let's take a breath and recap this epic journey. We started with the central paradox, the promise of AI abundance colliding head-on with the threat of severe AI-driven inequality. It is abundantly clear that the future is not a simple, clean binary between Elon Musk's post-scarcity, robot-driven utopia and Bernie Sanders' dystopian fears of resource-draining smokestacks.
The reality is infinitely more complex than a simplistic debate over acceleration versus a moratorium.
It is a race, a desperate race between two distinct models of the future. In one model, AI becomes the central nervous system of an automated, centralized surveillance state that permanently locks in a K-shaped oligarchy. In the other model, AI becomes the nervous system of an empowered, hyper-educated, radically transparent democratic citizenry.
The choice is between blind innovation that breaks society and structural innovation that elevates it.
And I want to say this directly to you, the listener, as you go back to your day. The core message of this deep dive, drawn straight from Hagat's phenomenal research, is this. Abundance is not just about producing more stuff. It's not just about cheaper software or faster robots. It is about deciding who gets to breathe the air. The architecture of the future is being built right now, today, in server farms and policy committees. And it must be built as a shared civilization, not a private empire.
We have to choose to build the levees to survive the climate shift.
Exactly. The tectonic plates are actively colliding. We need to build the right structures to survive the impact. And I want to leave you with one final, lingering thought to mull over until our next deep dive. Let's say we get this right. Let's say we implement the policies, we build the safety nets, and we create the transparent glass house. If AI eventually succeeds in doing all the heavy physical labor with robotics and all the tedious cognitive work with algorithms and perfectly manages our government so that we never have to fill out another form, what will we actually choose to do with our days? When survival and administration are entirely automated, what will be the new measure of a meaningful human life? Something to think about.